Hello and welcome to PFF at Night. I'm Doug Kyed, joined by Brad Spielberger. Brad, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Nice Wednesday edition. Some news, mostly coming from yourself today.
Yeah, let's kick it off with, I guess, one of the bigger stories of the day, and that's that Miami Dolphins have at least mentioned tight end Mike Gesicki's name revolving trade talks. This doesn't come, I guess, as a major surprise. He was someone that was actually brought up to me as a trade candidate, looked into it a little bit further, heard from a player personnel vice president that Gesicki's name had been mentioned in trade talks. And he's a guy who's been playing a little bit deeper into preseason games. People on that Dolphins beat actually expect Durham Smythe possibly to start over him this season if Mike Gesicki does stick on the roster. And that Mike McDaniel, the new head coach, Gesicki not the greatest fit in that system because coming from that Shanahan offense, they do like their tight ends to be able to block. Mike Gesicki said recently that he's playing a different position this season. He was quoted as saying, I was a wide receiver the last 2 or 3 years. Now I'm a tight end, which is interesting for him to admit to. I know that there was some discussion about whether he should be franchise tagged as a wide receiver or a tight end. Makes sense that he says that he's been playing wide receiver over the last couple of years. Now definitely being asked to block more, stay in line. And he's not the best blocker. He is more of a big wide receiver. Coaches around the league have said that about Mike Gesicki, but I understand you've kind of heard something similar about Gesicki being part of trade discussions.
Yeah, I said this in the tweet that we didn't talk about this, and we hadn't. But I heard something probably over a month ago. Yeah, we promise. I heard something over a month ago. Again, like you said, there's no one telling me or yourself, here's the teams and here's what was offered. But was said, look, his name was brought up. The team in Miami understood he maybe was not the best fit. Obviously, was entering a contract year and ultimately got franchise tagged. And it makes sense. I mean, you look at his stats. The last 2 years has a receiving grade above 70, has a run blocking grade below 55. I mean, he is not a fit in this offense. I think every year when you go through a coaching cycle, probably the most common one you hear about is a defense going from a 3-4 to a 4-3. The Bears this offseason may be a good example under Matt Eberflus. And so some guys do get pinched and they don't fit, but I honestly can't think of a worse fit in a new coaching system than Gesicki. He doesn't fit this offense at all. I think that the first thing I think of is teams are so cavalier sometimes with these franchise tags, especially at these cheap positions when it's less than $11 million for a really good slot receiver effectively, which is what Gesicki is. I think it almost makes them want to do it. I mean, safety is another one where Jesse Bates this past season, the Bengals had zero interest in actually offering him a legitimate contract. The same goes for guys like Marcus May in years past. I think Anthony Harris in Minnesota, somewhat of an example, but of an older guy. But nevertheless, you just wonder, what was the kind of thought process behind doing that? They extended Durham Smythe right when free agency started. Kind of a weird situation in Miami.
Yeah, it definitely is. And yeah, I mean, even if the Dolphins want to use him as a big slot this season, they already have Jalen Waddle, who excels out the slot. They already got Tyreek Hill, who's a good slot receiver. Cedric Wilson can move around a little bit. So I don't know, you'd almost be asking him to play like X wide receiver in that offense, which, I mean, maybe he can do, but definitely on the slower side, definitely on the bigger side. He doesn't really seem to have a fit either as their inline tight end or in the slot. Not sure if anything's actually going to happen here just because of the contract that Mike Gesicki does have on that franchise tag. He's set to make over $10 million. So might be kind of tricky to get another team to take on that salary in a trade, knowing that they can't extend him until after the season anyway. But were there any teams out there that stood out as fits for Mike Gesicki to you? One that came to mind for me, I saw some other people throwing it out there, was the Dallas Cowboys. They're a team, obviously, they've already got a tight end in Dalton Schultz, but their wide receiver core is so depleted that it's possible that they could move CeeDee Lamb back outside, have Mike Gesicki as a big slot. Any other teams out there that would be good fits for Mike Gesicki?
Yeah, and then just to your point, when that July 15th deadline passes for franchise tag players, you can't extend them. So I think that does work against a trade, and I was told that deadline kind of made it more difficult. But, I mean, I think the Green Bay Packers are a name you're going to hear. They could add another receiving option, frankly, could be one of their top options. Yes, they have Robert Tonyan, but he's coming off an injury. I think Gesicki would be a great red zone option to kind of have some smaller guys there. And I think Carolina sticks out a little bit as well. They're already all in. They have already traded a lot of draft capital away. They are spending way more money than they should, given how untalented their roster is. But, they have Ian Thomas and the blocking tight end already there. They just extended him. Maybe you bring in Gesicki. Terrace Marshall's not really working out in the slot. Their second-round pick from last year. And then you have a great trio in Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, and Mike Gesicki.
Yeah, the Panthers are in an interesting spot there with their number 2 and 3 wide receivers. And Rashard Higgins has stepped up a little bit, but you don't necessarily need him to be your number 3 receiver. And I think it was Joe Person for The Athletic was reporting that he might even, see Rashard Higgins taking over number 2 snaps over Robbie Anderson. Anderson's had pretty weird offseason with some comments that he made before Baker Mayfield was traded there. Just kind of a situation monitor there. One other team, Tennessee Titans, they just lost so much this offseason by trading away A.J. Brown. It's been kind of a slow learning curve, it seems like, for Treylon Burks in there. He's dealt with some injuries. They don't exactly have a world burner at tight end already. So either as that big wide receiver, smaller tight end, there's definitely a way to fit a guy like Mike Gesicki in your offense. I was actually talking to someone today who thought that the Titans might have a pretty difficult time moving the ball on offense through the air this season, because also Robert Woods is at this point kind of used to being schemed open by Sean McVay in that Rams offense. Totally different story for him, also coming off that torn ACL. So yeah, definitely a lot of teams out there who could use Mike Gesicki, but that salary is a little bit prohibitive. Let's talk about another wide receiver situation that's pretty interesting right now, and that's the New York Giants. This came one day after head coach Brian Daboll was saying that Colin Roberts and David Sills not only, are primed to make the team, but also actually play this season. Colin Roberts went down with a lower leg injury. Pat Leonard of the New York Daily News reported that they fear that it's a torn Achilles, but this has some reverberations on their wide receiver core with a player like Darius Slayton, who I think a lot of people expected potentially would be traded or released. If you take Colin Roberts out of that group, they've still got a ton of wide receivers with Wan'Dale Robinson, Kadarius Toney. They've got Kenny Golladay. The Sterling Shepard just came off the PUP list. That's another big thing for the Giants. But maybe Darius Slayton now sticks onto this roster with Colin Roberts going down, but he's making $2.5 million, which could potentially hurt his chances of making the roster. What do you think about the Giants wide receiver situation?
Yeah, I believe his name's Collin Johnson. I wanted to stop you after the first one.
Oh, did I say Roberts?
We said Roberts. We're not going to stop. We're going to push through. We're going to power through.
Colin Roberts is an agent.
There you go.
And they spell their first name the same way. Collin Johnson.
Does he represent Collin Johnson?
Well, they're both Collin.
Well, he needs to become his new agent, and that'll be even more confusing for you. But, yes. But yeah, no, I mean, he's shown some ability. He's a big body guy, and you mentioned Kenny Golladay, but he obviously is coming off an awful season, hasn't really looked great in camp. There's a video of him kind of loafing through a drill. And it sounds like Collin Johnson was looking, like that next big body guy on the outside, because you mentioned the rest of their receivers are a little bit smaller. Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson, more slot guys. Even Sterling Shepard coming off the PUP list today. Normally a slot guy, he's kind of 50-50 split if you look at his breakdown, but it's an unfortunate injury. They do have the depth there, but yeah, most importantly, maybe it does keep Darius Slayton in the fold, especially if they're not going to cut him, right? They maybe would trade him, but now if he was a roster bubble guy and a cut candidate, I imagine that is no longer the case.
I have a question for you specifically, since you're so deep in the weeds on these things. Darius Slayton making $2.5 million this season because of, what is it, the veteran raise, like these players who have solid seasons get kind of a pay bump in the fourth year of their contract above what they would have been making based on their play throughout the first 2 or 3 years of their careers. We saw with Jake Bailey, he was making a lot of money in year 4 of his rookie contract. Darius Slayton, Myles Gaskin is another one who's making more money than he would have based on his previous play. Obviously, guys want to make more money, but Gaskin and Darius Slayton, two guys who are in that surprise trade cut situation, can that almost kind of work against some guys in some ways?
This is a great question. I love that we're getting into the contract weeds on the show here. So it's called the Proven Performance Escalator. Yes. There are new levels to it now in the newest CBA, but at the simplest level, if you play a certain amount of snaps over the first 3 years of your rookie contract, you then get that pay bump in the fourth year. And then for the punters, you mentioned Jake Bailey. If you make a Pro Bowl, you get the highest level, and it basically guarantees an extension if you're a punter. It's happened 2 years in a row now with him and Michael Dixon, but nevertheless, it does. It can definitely work against you. I want want to say a tackle for the Bengals had happened this offseason where basically the team approached him and said, hey, you're going to have to take a pay cut and go back down to the level you were at. I could be mixing up players there, but we see it every offseason where essentially, yes, the team says it happened with the Giants last year. I'm also blanking on the name there, but they said, hey, look, congrats on getting this pay raise. Good for you, but none of it is guaranteed. And we can't pay you that elevated level. We're going to have to ask you to go back down to where you were. It does. It's kind of a double-edged sword, and it's unfortunate. You think that the NFLPA could try to find a way to maybe make some of that money guaranteed or whatever, because you're earning this pay raise and then it's kind of working against you.
Yeah, I think that would probably be the solution, is to make it guaranteed or something like that. Obviously, teams might not agree to that. But if you're a player like Myles Gaskin or Darius Slayton, who aren't superstars, who just wind up getting a ton of playing time, either because of injuries or because of a talent deficiency, they're going to wind up making a lot more than the players that they're competing for roster spots against in year 4 of their rookie deal. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting situation where if you're a superstar, you'll probably get an extension in year 4 anyway. So I'm not totally sure who this really benefits as far as the system goes. Maybe there does need to be some tweaks to it. Speaking of surprise cuts, Kenyan Drake released by the Las Vegas Raiders. This happened kind of while we were recording Monday's show, but another interesting situation with his contract. He was given a 2-year, $11 million deal last year by the Las Vegas Raiders. They actually tweaked that deal this year to open up some cap space, and he still wound up getting released. So what was your reaction to them actually making this decision, despite kind of tweaking that contract, and where do you think would be a good spot for him to land?
Yeah, I mean, basically, he got a 2-year, $11 million fully guaranteed contract last year. It's probably one of the worst deals handed out in free agency, and I think a lot of us said that at the time. Just didn't make a ton of sense. Coming off I think he had a transition tag the year prior in Arizona. Basically they restructured that roster bonus $5.5 million because it was already fully guaranteed at that point. And then his salary, the $2.5 million salary, is fully guaranteed. But I think most important there, it is subject to offset. So for other clubs, I think they are going to be very attracted to a Kenyan Drake because he is a true 3-down back. And you could probably convince him to take the minimum salary, considering no one's going to give him more than $2.5 million, I would imagine. Maybe I'm wrong there, coming off an injury. And I think there are some teams that make a ton of sense. I think the Philadelphia Eagles make a ton of sense. I think the Buffalo Bills, yes, they drafted James White and they have Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, but they could make sense as well. And the last one, the obvious one, if Alvin Kamara has legal issues, sounds like Tony Busby, the attorney who represented Deshaun Watson's accusers, is now representing his accuser of assault. In that case, if that happens in 2022, I think Kenyan Drake would make a lot of sense in New Orleans as well.
Now I get to do it to you. You said James White. You meant James Cook. It's all right. We're 1-1 now at this point. One other team that I would throw out there that I think would be kind of interesting would be, I don't really remember how things ended there, but a return to the Arizona Cardinals would be kind of interesting because it sounds like Darrell Williams might not be guaranteed to make that roster in Arizona. I think a lot of people expected him to be their 3rd down back this season, with James Conner also in the mix. Right now, it's looking like James Conner, number 1, why am I blanking on his last name? Benjamin, number 2. They've got Jonathan Ward. They've got Keontae Ingram, who's the rookie. So they could certainly use another back in that mix. Atlanta Falcons perhaps as well. I don't know how competitive they really want to be this season, but they've got some issues there at running back. And then one other one is that if by some chance J.K. Dobbins won't be ready for the start of the season, I know that they've got Mike Davis there in Baltimore, but the Ravens always seem to accumulate running backs, and Gus Edwards.
What's wrong with us today?
Now I'm in my head about this, where I'm like, I know his name's Gus Edwards, but I don't want to be the next one to screw up a name. Gus Edwards starting the season on PUP reserve, so he'll miss the first 4 weeks of the season. Sticking with the Miami Dolphins, which we talked about a little bit earlier, they're working out Trey Flowers, obviously a longtime veteran edge defender, played in a couple of different New England style defenses with the Patriots and with the Detroit Lions. Josh Boyer there in Miami runs a very similar system. So this is a pretty natural fit. They would be pretty loaded on the edge if they did add Trey Flowers. But if they can get him cheap enough, I think anyone should sign Trey Flowers right now.
I agree with you. Yeah. I mean, obviously been derailed by injuries. His time in Detroit was forgettable after signing a huge deal for $18 million per year. And, another New England regime goes over there, tries to bring him aboard and didn't go too well. But you mentioned the loaded edge group. I mean, Jalen Phillips, And Emmanuel Ogbah with a new extension. They already have Melvin Ingram and Andrew Van Ginkel as fellow outside linebackers in the fold there. He'd be the fifth guy, in a rotational capacity. And then you have good guys in the interior and Christian Wilkins. Obviously, their secondary is one of the best in the NFL. That defense could be loaded, and deep with a lot of, potential depth if there are injuries in the mix. So, yeah, that was an interesting one. I can't believe it's taken until August 24th for him to finally get a workout. Maybe some health-related things there, but that could be a scary defense if they add another piece.
Yeah, Trey Flowers has dealt with some injuries in recent years, but I think the appeal of adding him to that style of defense, I'm kind of surprised that the Raiders haven't been interested, or the Patriots, is that he can play almost any role on that defense. He could play a wide 9. He could play a 7 technique. He can play a 5 technique if you're running a 3-4. He could even play on the nose on third down, which is something they did pretty regularly with the Patriots. He's just a country strong edge defender who can play in the middle of your defense if he needs to. He can get pressure from pretty much anywhere, and he's a good run defender. So wouldn't necessarily only be a situational pass rusher. He could be kind of a situational first and second down guy for the Dolphins as well if they do make that move. The Giants have confirmed now that Collin Johnson unfortunately did tear his Achilles. I'm not sure how Colin Roberts is doing. Hopefully his Achilles is holding up just fine. More Patriots-related coaching staffs. Josh McDaniels will not necessarily confirm that Darren Waller will play week 1 of the season. He was asked about it again today. I'm not sure how concerned we should be about this, just because the Patriots have always been pretty sketchy about injuries. It would be almost out of character for someone coming from New England to give hard set updates on any injuries. But what's your feeling on Darren Waller right now?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at it, and I think he's had one practice in all of the preseason, where he's been there and been a full participant. Yeah, look, he obviously has plenty of chemistry with Derek Carr at this point. I don't think he needs to develop chemistry with Devontae Adams. They know where they need to be and how to get open and all those things. But look, it's the classic, to me, an injury where it's kind of hard to actually gauge it. It's a hamstring that's apparently been nagging him for almost the entire offseason. It's a hold-in injury. I mean, I'll put it that way. It's an injury that strikes me as, I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist. I'm not trying to create news that I have not heard about or, something out of nowhere. But again, we've talked about him. He is a guy that deserves a new contract, is getting massively underpaid. He knows it. Everyone else knows it. It's just, I think it is something that is worth monitoring. I'm not saying they're going to trade him tomorrow, but I think it's something that it is indeed worth monitoring.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, is it possible that, it hasn't been reported as such, has not been reported as a hold-in, but like you said, seems like it's not necessarily a serious injury that's keeping him out. But at the same time, they're learning a new offense in Las Vegas, and these snaps away from the team could certainly hurt him in 2022. And, it's the Josh McDaniels offense. I'm not sure if he brought the entire, encyclopedia bound playbook to Las Vegas that he had with Tom Brady and the Patriots, but that's a complex offense. And I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily trust a guy who's obviously been in Las Vegas for a while, but having to learn a new offense and being an impact player from week 1 if he doesn't wind up practicing. So it's definitely an interesting situation to monitor. And I mean, that's another one where, pretty much all the teams that we mentioned for Mike Gesicki would be trade candidates for Darren Waller. We're not saying that it's at that point or that it's the same type of situation, but I don't know, just definitely something to monitor there with Darren Waller. And if something did happen there, then, their weapons would be significantly diminished. They're another team that doesn't necessarily have a set in stone number 3 wide receiver right now. Matt Collins is competing for it. Keelan Cole is competing for it. And beyond that, it's Teron Johnson. They're a team that the Patriots are there right now for joint practices. They're probably watching the Patriots wide receivers, seeing if any of those guys are available in a trade or available, who are released or whatever it's going to be. But what do you think about that situation in Las Vegas overall?
Yeah, no, like you said, it's interesting because it will have a big impact. Obviously, Devontae Adams is no stranger to being the only weapon, and they have Hunter Renfrow in tow. But of course, injuries happen, and that could then be catastrophic in a year where they are, all in for all intents and purposes. They spent a lot of money, a lot of draft capital to try and be a competitive team this year in that AFC West. And again, I'm going to one more conspiracy theory, and I know Josh McDaniels has said He's not trying to be Bill Belichick 2.0, which I think he probably was in Denver, and that's why that ended poorly. But they also let Waller attend a WNBA game across the street hours before their own preseason game. Look, he wasn't going to play in the preseason game, but I don't know. A Bill Belichick disciple letting a guy sit courtside hours before their team played. Like you said, it's a new offense. He has not only receiving capability, but I'm sure there's more blocking responsibility in this offense. It's a little strange. They need him there, and I think they got to, if he wants an extension, they should try to get it done.
Did you catch Hard Knocks last night?
I sure did.
Did you have a favorite moment from Hard Knocks last night?
I guess this is a cheat answer, but not even a favorite moment, but I realized how subtle. Dan Campbell is packing missiles, and by that I mean he's got a big old chaw in very regularly. Like the guy, I think he went to Texas A&M. He's a Texas-born individual. It's almost subtle, but it's also not subtle. I mean, he's always got one in.
Yeah, that is 100% true. He's the prototypical head coach there. The Rodrigo storyline, Malcolm Rodriguez, like after this year of Hard Knocks, like if he's not Ray Lewis or Zach Thomas or like name your prototypical, all pro middle linebacker, then I think there's gonna be some disappointment here. I feel like they're like pushing. If this was like if Dan Campbell was actually like a pro wrestler, like who was the comedian on there that was calling him Hulk Hogan,
Josh Woods. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like Hard Knocks is pushing Malcolm Rodriguez to be this superstar linebacker this season. He's getting first team reps. He was a 6th round pick. He graded great for us last year. And he's also grading great for us in the preseason so far. So it's pretty amazing how some of these guys kind of fall under the radar. But that was a lot of fun it's been a lot of fun to monitor him, and some of the Jamal Williams joint practice clips were fantastic as well. Like it's amazing how many characters they've got on this year's Hard Knocks.
Speaking of that running back room, I was cracking up because it happens to me a decent amount. When Deuce Staley lost his voice and was trying to yell at the guys, but was just like could barely hear what he was saying, I as a player would have been laughing. Like they kind of panned like DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams and those guys as he was screaming at them with no volume, and I think they were probably fighting back a laugh. But to the Malcolm Rodriguez point, one final thing. If GM Brad Holmes hits again on a 5th, 6th, 7th round kind of non-premium defensive player, in this case undersized, he's 5'11", I think it's probably why he fell. That is his bread and butter. And if he does it again, I think we need to recognize it's not an anomaly. It's not random, that he is identifying and seeing something that other people simply are not. And it's adding massive value to the team, the Rams, and now the Lions.
Yeah, and we even saw it last year with some of the undrafted free agents that they had. Jerry Jacobs, they had another one in their secondary as well, where last year, because it was such a small draft class, like there were 0 undrafted free agents contributing. Like some teams didn't even really sign undrafted free agents because the draft class was so small that I don't think that they thought that they were worthy of cutting a veteran player to bring in one of those UDFAs. The Lions actually found a couple. So yeah, that goes to that point as well. All right. Keep it on PFF.com for all of your news and analysis. PFF Plus now $80, best deal in sports. You can get a free trial for a week as well. So if you're doing your fantasy draft in the next week, it's a no-brainer. Sign up for PFF Plus, get that free trial, dig around, see what you like, stay on board for the full $80 a year. What is it? $10 a month as well. But yeah, sign up for it for $80 annually. And follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Throw me a follow at Doug Kyed, and we will be back with you guys again next Monday.